Yes, this is Paul Schrader, writer and director of First Reformed. As a critic before I became a screenwriter, I'd written a book on transcendental style in film, and I'd always been interested in transcendental, spiritual, contemplative films, given my church background, but I never thought I would make one. It just wasn't for me. I was too intoxicated by the engines of action and empathy and sex and violence, and they are not exactly part of the transcendental toolkit. But then about 3 years ago, I had a dinner with Pavel Pavlovsky, who had done a film called Ida. And I liked this film very much, and I got to talking with him about, how you make a film today. And I left that dinner, and I said, it's time. It's time for you to write that film you swore you would never write. And I did. And as references, I used a number of the films that I had liked. And this film here is full of references. These credit sequences, for example, are from Voyage in Italy. And this long opening shot is from a film called Silent Light. But the main references were, of course, the journals from Bresson, Country Priest, and Pickpocket, a device I had also used in Taxi Driver and Light Sleeper. So I took the priest from Country Priest. I took the milieu, the setting, from Bergman's Winterlight. And then I took the ending from a film by Carl Dreyer, or Debt. And then I also incorporated a few Tarkovsky elements and other things, and somehow bound it all together with the glue of Taxi Driver. And it ended up becoming its own thing. It's always sort of amazing as you crib and steal around from movies that influence you and have meaning for you, then you put them all together and you realize that your thing is different from all of those. So now I'm in the process of setting you up to watch a slow film. I call this church First Reformed. In every community there is a First Reformed. I was a product of the Christian Reformed Church and not the Dutch Reformed Church, which is another denomination. Now I'm slowing everything down here and starting to get you in the mood for what I'm up to, which is a kind of measured, calculated, offsetting use of time so that things don't happen as quickly or as you expect. When you make a contemplative film, there are a number of techniques that you use. Different filmmakers use them in different proportions. But all of them, to some degree or other, are withholding devices. They are all giving you less. So just like the unmoving camera gives you less, the 1:3:3 format gives you less, the color palette, the performances, it all sort of works in this way. Now, here's Mr. Hawk. A word about him. When I write a script, I don't usually think of an actor. I think that makes you a lazy writer. But about 2/3 of the way through the script, I started thinking about Ethan. And I started thinking, he's just the right age now to do this. Just the right look, just the right age. And so I sent it to him after I had written it, before there was any other attachments. And he responded in 24 hours. And then it was just a matter of, the time it takes to get a film financed. With today's technology, you could make a film like this one in 20 days that would have taken 40 days 2 decades ago. And so what that means is you make it for half as much. And so certain subject matter, which may not have been commercially viable in the past, starts to become viable. That's what Pavel and I were talking about. And because I don't feel that a filmmaker has the obligation to make his financiers rich, but he does have the obligation to try to get their money back at least.
There is a leak
So
in the men's restaurant
as you saw from the previous cut,
under the hot faucet.
normally films cut on action. You cut when somebody enters a room or leaves a room. When you're doing films that are withholding, you start using delayed cuts, which is you wait till the person leaves and then you take a beat. So just like I took a beat before Ethan walked into the church, and I took a beat after the parishioners left.
Yeah, nice to see you again.
I wanted to.
Amanda Seyfried here was pregnant during the course of this film, and the financiers gave me a list of 10 actresses that they would like me to consider, and I checked on Amanda, and someone said, "Oh, she's not doing any work now." And then I found out why, because she was pregnant, and we met, and her agent was all excited about her doing this, but we would have to shoot her out immediately the first 8 days. And that we did. In fact, it, in a way, helped with the financing because, when the cash flow didn't come on time, all I had to do is say,
He applied.
here, look at her face. See, most of the time, actresses who are pregnant, they just have a large stomach, but they still have a thin face. Well, that's not really quite how it works. Your face gets fatter as well, and so she has that full face of a pregnant woman, which is very nice. So that you can, tell the, I said to the financiers, I said, I'll give you the number of Amanda's obstetrician, but I don't think he's going to give you any wiggle room. And so that was a nice leverage tool. There's these books coming up. This is my own Bible that I was given in 1956 by my parents. And Chesterton's Heretics, The Way of Unknowing, and Letters of Thomas Merton. That little hazelnut is from Julian of Norwich. It's a symbol. She was one of the very early mystics and wrote early books of meditation. And she wrote about looking at a hazelnut in your palm for an hour and seeing the entire world. And so that's a little in reference there to. I recently did a series of lectures at various seminaries around the country, and every time I'd always ask, and they didn't get it at Calvin, and they didn't get it at Fuller, but at Yale Divinity they recognized it.
If only I could pray.
So in this scene, you can see what I'm up to. This woman enters camera left with her dog. She walks across screen. She has nothing to do with anything. She's not important to anything. She exits. Then I cue Ethan. And it's just a way of telling the viewer things are not going to happen at the speed you expect. We're up to something a little bit different. The same thing applies to what David Bordwell called planimetric composition, where things are seen essentially on the same plane, symmetrically, and where you don't use a lot of foregrounding. And that is another withholding technique. The young man here, Phil Ettinger, was quite a happy discovery. He had this long scene, and it so happened because of Amanda's availability that we had to shoot it the very first day. And it was a 12-page scene. And the master on it ran 15 minutes long. And so I asked Ethan and Philip, whether they'd be willing to do it the first day. And they were. And so this was our first day's work with these long 15-minute shots. Now, again, you're looking at a planimetric composition. Both characters on the same plane. And you will notice shortly that because of this format, I forego something else that you are very used to seeing in movies, which is over-the-shoulder shots. Now, in original square compositions, they didn't have many over-the-shoulders. They didn't need them. But once the screen ratio become excessively horizontal, and there's a big head in one half of the frame, then they needed something to put in the other half of the frame, and they started putting the other person's the shoulder, who they were talking to, or part of their head. And now over the shoulders are, one of the most common compositions in filmmaking. And but I don't use any over the shoulders in this film. Now, no one seeing this film is going to turn to his date and say, oh, wow, he's not using over the shoulders. No, they're not going to notice that. But they will notice it is different. They will notice that the cutting and the compositions are somewhat off. And just the same reason I'm holding this shot here so long. Just like I held the first shot with Amanda and Ethan so long. And they'll finally, you hold it longer than the audience expects you to hold it, and then you can cut in. So normally what you would do in this kind of situation is that after the two shot, the next shot would be over his shoulder. So it would either be over Ethan or over Philip. But I'm not doing the overs, and I'm also doing what they call square punching, which is putting the character right smack in the crosshairs of the center of the frame. This scene is really the secret to how the film works. It's very, very long, very talky, and it conveys a sense of contemporaneous concern and a sense of seriousness. And Ethan comes off, and is written to come off, Reverend Toller, as eminently qualified and sensible a man of cloth. And so here are the terms of the story I wish to lay forth. And after I lay those terms forth for probably an hour, then I can start to veer a little bit. It's the same thing like with Taxi Driver. You just stay inside the taxi driver's head for an hour, and then all of a sudden he starts to veer off. And at some point, you start to, you realize that you are empathizing with a character who no longer deserves your empathy. And that's a very interesting moment in art, when you can get a viewer or reader to that place where he still cares, but knows he shouldn't. And what happens after that, the artist cannot really determine, because now you're really into the world of idiosyncratic interchange between a hearer and a listener, and what one is making up as he goes along. What's so nice about Ettinger's performance here is he really, you can really see him listening. So often, actors don't really listen, and you can see how the words fall upon him, and it's a very wonderful performance that way.
You think Mary should have an abortion?
I'm going to do something in a moment.
That you're right, is that your decision?
You know, one of the nice things about making rules is that you get to be the first one to break them. And
Look,
so the rule I've established here is no tilt, no pan, locked off camera.
you.
And
Despair, your lack of hope.
in a moment, I'm going to do a push-in on Ethan
Our history have woken
and hear his voice from his diary.
haunted by blackness.
Um,
The sense that our lives are with
I think one of the reasons this scene works at the length it does is because right in the middle of it, I break the rule, and then I go back to the rule.
great achievements
And you say,
to the place
you know, why would someone go to the trouble of making a rule
foreseeable future. Yes, that's
just so that he could break it?
blackness.
And that's exactly the point, because people, viewers, forget there is a rule. So every once in a while you break it, and then go back to it, and it keeps your
Interest enough to ensure its
you,
own
you in control of the
is the
interchange.
But do you think that there's any existence?
I spoke a little too early because the shot is probably coming up
Yeah, right before.
momentarily. Yeah, here it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, wait, so you're talking about the next lifetime?
This push-in right here,
I felt like I was Jacob wrestling all night long.
which is a physical move, not a zoom.
Grasp.
And
Every sentence, every question.
it just is enough
Mortal
to
struggle.
keep this conversation, which was becoming
You believe in martyrdom?
very static, sort of bring it to life without doing anything
Early Christians who
grotesquely fancy, you know.
the missionaries
So you can stay simple, but one little shift in the simplicity, and you're back on track.
trying to protect the environment. 117 were
The
killed last year for their
the
beliefs.
the subject at hand now is martyrdom.
Right there. this
He's
is
talking about
Jose
ecological martyrs,
Silva,
and
and that's his
obviously
wife.
this is a subject that will, become
They were gunned down in
pretty much at the core of the film.
in the Amazon.
There's a couple things that keep repeating through here. One is the notion of prayer.
Hey,
Why can't I pray? Will you pray with me? So forth.
enough.
And the other is this notion of martyrdom.
What were the purpose?
And the third is the perilous situation of the environment.
In 2010, the IPCC
And I keep
did that a drastic
returning to these themes.
environmental
When you make a choice like this to have a very, very long static scene right at the beginning of a film, it really does define it. And if it works, you have gotten the viewer to where you want them to be at this time. If it doesn't work, you pretty well cursed yourself. Why did I think it would work? I thought it would work because it worked on the page. This was such an interesting conversation as I wrote and imagined it. And it's still mostly there. I would say the master was about 14 to 15 minutes, and the scene now is around 12, which means that 2 to 3 minutes, 2 to 3 pages were cut from the dialogue.
Into a war that had no more.
I originally thought of doing the film in black and white in 1:3:3, and that was because of Ida. Pavlovsky had shot it in that format, black and white, and I was very struck by that. And I thought I will do that. I will take that from Ida.
I'm in this position at First Reform, and here I am.
But as we got
I can promise
closer into it, the
here.
financier pointed out a delivery requirement that that the film had to be 90 minutes long, between 90 and 120 minutes, and that it had to be in color. And so I had to give up on the black and white, although I did, as you can see here, work on a very muted palette.
Joseph. The boy thrown down the well.
I remember.
It used to be on digital film that you couldn't shoot in black and white. Now you can. They actually have a digital chip you can use in black and white. But other films, such as Nebraska, are shot in color and then just dialed down to black and white. And it's not the same thing. You know, you really have to decide before you make the film whether you're going to be in color or black and white, because it's a different lighting pattern. And so we decided that this would be in color, but would work on all these muted tones with a
life without despair is a life
few breaks of the rule now and then.
in our head is life itself.
So the production designer was a woman, Grace Yoon, who I had used on Dog Eat Dog. In fact, my whole sort of crew here is picked up from Dog Eat Dog, a film which is just the opposite of this one. Fully profane and outrageous and Tarantino-esque. And for that film, I had assembled a whole group of young people new to film. This was their first solo credit in each case. And because I wanted to get some really fresh thinking, I didn't want people who were going to think outside the box. I wanted people who didn't know there was a box. And so I put them together for that film. And I so liked how it had invigorated me that I brought them all back for this film, even though this is the stylistic opposite of that film.
Covers us all.
But, you know, it is, you know, they say that, you know, artists eat their young, and that's true. And it's a very good phenomenon because the young need to be eaten to grow.
Tomorrow, after lunch, same time.
Okay, yeah.
The cinematographer was Alex Diamond. At this date, he had only done 2 films. They're both for me.
Said what should have been said, what could have been said differently.
Now he's going to quote something from Thomas Merton.
I know that nothing.
And one of the things that attracted Ethan immediately to this script was the quotes by Merton, because Ethan has a spiritual side. His former father-in-law is one of the foremost authorities on Eastern religion. And he has been to Gethsemane, which is the monastery in Tennessee, where Merton would go and refresh himself. So Ethan knew this whole world right down. And also because Ethan is so talented in so many different areas, writer, director, musician, actor, playwright. Oh, there's a couple of little hidden references to Taxi Driver and Diary of a Country Priest. In Diary of a Country Priest, the priest with stomach cancer only eats bread and wine. And in Taxi Driver, Travis pours himself peach brandy into cereal. And here, Reverend Toller dips the wine into the whiskey.
It was made by settlers, follow me, using local...
This church was in Bethpage, right by Long Island City, right at the edge of Queens.
Her tombstone dates back to 1787.
You know, I set the movie in Albany, but of course, for financial reasons, you try to shoot it all within the 30-mile zone of New York City because that saves a lot of money. So you were looking for places in New York that would sell as rural. And this particular church filled a square block on top of a hill, but it was smack in the middle of Queens. And but when you were up on top of the hill, you couldn't see the city. And so it could have been, you know, an isolated rural church.
We have mugs, caps, postcards, keychains.
And similarly, you know, we shot in Staten Island, and yeah, everything. This was an Episcopal church, and those who are savvy will realize that when they see those crowns, which are Episcopalian.
And the church organ, which unfortunately is in...
The church was more decorated than this.
By A.G. Hill.
we had to take a lot of stuff out.
Choir mistress and the minister?
My general strategy and policy about no, this is a joke from my childhood. I remember hearing this one when I was about 12 or 13.
Come on, follow me.
My general strategy was,
Thank you.
if it moves, take it out. And so I tried to do things as sparse as possible. And people don't have carpets on their floors, and they don't have little pictures on their walls. This interior is the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME Church in Brooklyn. We were going to use another church, the CCC Church, but at the last minute, the church got cold feet, and I think the minister had political ambitions and didn't want to take a chance. But they were kind enough to let us use this. Here's a shot I particularly like. I mean, I love just taking the time here, taking the time to let him walk down, take the time to just let him sit and listen. And I love this shot right here because, it was really brutal Christian lyrics of being washed in the blood, washed in the blood. And you can feel, the blood washing over him as he sits here. It'll be quite obvious that in the course of this, I did not skew the film toward the more pop culture, evangelical movements about now, the sort of singing, dancing, country music.
Take 5.
I skewed much closer to the church I knew and the church I was brought up in. And I'm not really that comfortable around these mega churches with their, sort of football stadium mentality.
Remember that?
The minister of this church, which we call the Abundant Life Church,
Try telling them that.
and this church underwrites his small little historical church. Now, here again, you see the frame is empty and he enters, and then you don't cut until after, he exits. That's all just the pattern throughout. The head of this evangelical church,
This is my wife's stuff. So,
we are so predisposed to stereotyping
good. Reverend Tony.
ministers and pastors of large churches. And we just, you give the audience half a chance and they'll
Get your water or anything.
lock that person into a stereotype.
So how are
And so I thought, how can I get around that? Because I don't want this guy, Reverend Jeffers, to seem like the stereotype of the arena-style church.
just around the corner?
Yeah, of course. It's only 8 weeks away.
The first thing I did was I said, let's make him black so that, those images you have of Pat Robertson don't immediately come into your head.
Mayor, his people.
But then in casting, I started thinking that, maybe it should be someone who people associate with laughing, a comic. And that might help me get around that. And the casting person said, well, what is this guy actually like? I said, well, he's sort of like Steve Harvey. And they said, oh, well, Steve Harvey's the hardest working man in show business. You're not going to get him. And the next day, Susan Shopmaker, who was the casting person, said to me, well, what do you think of Cedric the Entertainer? And I said, that's a great idea. And, I met with Cedric, and he read, and it was fine. And And I'm so glad that because I was with him in Toronto, and you can see people's faces light up when they spot him coming. And that allowed me to get out from underneath that stereotype of the white, bigoted, megachurch personality.
I mean, it's been a while since we've talked. You know, even if
And this is a line here that also I remember from my childhood, you know, even a pastor needs a pastor.
here more often. You should get out, come around, and be a part of things. So many activities.
As you can surmise, I did not have to do a great deal of research for this film. Between
Museum.
growing up in the Christian Reformed Church, Westside Christian, Grand Rapids Christian High, Calvin College, and between that and writing that book and studying spiritual films, when I finally made the decision 50 years later to do a film in this style, in this way, everything went quite quickly because I knew all the reference films by heart. I knew all of the people, the situations. I knew, you know, what they said and think, and so it went quite quickly, probably 2 months start to finish. Now, here again is a case of an environment that has absolutely been cleaned out, you know, repainted, and then with this super graphic on the wall. Now, Victoria Hill is an Australian actress, and she came to my attention through her production company, which Fibonacci Films. And, you know, she wanted to play this character. I was a little concerned that she was a little too pretty. So I warned her, I said, you know, if you play this character, I'm going to make you look dowdy. And so she bought into that, and so I ended up making her look like Liv Ullmann in Winter Light. And so it worked out quite well. There's a little bits of the Australian accent you can hear now and then.
Sin that we transgressed.
No, that's not what I think. I've seen enough real sin to know the difference. It's just... Okay?
Okay.
And these wonderful deadpan readings from Ethan, like this one right here, I Am Happy.
Well, I am happy.
When I first met with Ethan on this, I said to him, you know, this is a lean-back performance.
Some are called for their suffering.
Often performers lean into a role, trying to get the audience to love or care for them, identify with them. This kind of performance leans away from the audience. And that can be a risky thing to do because you are rejecting the audience's attempts to make contact, and you're just moving back. But if you do it successfully, then the audience will start moving toward you. And so that the acting technique becomes just like the other film techniques of withholding. You know, the actor is withholding something from you. Are you going to lean in and try to get it from him? And as soon as I said that to Ethan, oh, here's a make a rule, break a rule. Okay, so we've never had a lateral dolly in this film. And I have this composition. I let the car go through. She comes out. Now, I don't pan the camera. You know, it looks like, you know, he's obviously right off frame, but we're not going to pan the camera. We're not going to see him. So we have to wait till he comes in. And then I make this little move, which is the oddest little move. And then I stop moving again. And so it just as Ethan, you know, is doing this lean back performance, and also with Amanda and Cedric But they also understand the make a rule, break a rule concept, which is that if you just lean back all the time, it may start to go beige. And so you always unexpectedly lean forward and then lean back again. And he has one strong break a rule moment in this.
It's a suicide vest. And there's other elements in there.
And with Amanda,
Detonators.
the challenge for her was
Some jelly.
she
You know, he'd been working
has
in the garage.
perfected this cute technique,
Fixing a motor.
this adorable technique. And right there it is with her arms. And, you know, they have to keep saying, no, don't signal. Don't send us any signals.
I'm gonna take it and
And so that was a little bit hard for her.
Go to the police.
But again, here you can see that, you know, as she is pregnant and kind of full in the face, it really has taken part of the obligation to be cute off her shoulders. She doesn't have that cute little body, and she doesn't have that cute little face. And so she's free to not do so much of those mannerisms that she often does.
No,
Coming around,
there's
calling.
He has no friends.
Yeah, this is a scene that
Sociable.
heightens the stakes. You know, it's the so-called clock, or Hitchcock called it the clock, and Chekhov called it the rifle over the fireplace. Once you introduce this element, in this case, it's the suicide vest, you've started a clock, because sooner or later, that element is going to come back again. You just don't introduce an element that strong. And the trick is
listening and waiting for God's
how to disguise its re-entry in a way that the audience is not ahead of you. The offset here, now he's talking about discernment, which is a Christian phrase meaning waiting for God's
tempered,
advice.
fight the urge not to write down the thoughts which come to my mind.
And yet we talked about discernment while he is,
The desire to pray itself is a type of prayer.
throwing up and unclogging the toilet. And that juxtaposition of voiceover and action, makes it very rich. Keeps it from being too on the nose. The Bissell music, that was a star in my hometown of Grand Rapids.
I wasn't expecting you for another couple weeks.
We got a message from the boss. He said it was a top priority.
You having some kind of big event here? Yeah, church is having its 250th anniversary. Abundant Life is planning quite the ceremony. Mighty fortress.
I suppose it's as good a time as any to talk about music, or the lack of it. Another technique these still and contemplative films use is the absence of music and heightened sound effects. Music is the easiest, most powerful, simplest way to manipulate an audience. We are used to being manipulated in this way. It tells you directly how to feel: happy, sad, scared, excited. It reinforces the passivity of the viewer. Now, this scene right here is one that in any conventional film would be calling out for music. And there is no music here. There is no music. The director is not telling you that this is important or that this is terrible. He's not telling you anything. The music consists of a plane at one point going over some birds and some wind in the trees. The idea behind not using music, not giving instructions of the viewer how to feel, is to make them uneasy and start to put it together themselves. Everything you are doing with all of these withholding techniques is trying to make the viewer active. Movies are such a passive art, you know, and such a needy art. The viewer is passive, the filmmaker is needy. He grabs the viewer by the lapels and says, love me, here's some action, here's some beautiful girls, and here's some music to tell you how to feel all the time. Well, when you stop doing that, when you let go of the lapels and you lean away and you don't play them any music,
What's he like? A businessman.
the viewer then has, and you slow it all down, the viewer has a choice of one of two things. One, he can lean into you, which is what you want. Two, he can get up and walk out of the theater because he's bored. And the trick of these stylistic techniques is how to lean away from the viewer without boring them or making them excessively bored. In other words, how to use boredom as precisely as a surgical scalpel, and to use it just right here, like that shot, waiting on that shot, waiting for that non-character to get up and leave. And how to surgically use boredom.
Else like that.
Here's another interesting shot. Okay, so I find that when you strip away objects, there's nothing on these tables, no books, there's nothing. You can have one interesting thing in a room. And often it can be a lamp. But I said to Grace, I said, you know, what we need is an odd lamp. We need one odd lamp. And she came back with some ideas, and one of them was an eyeball. I said, that's great, let's get that lamp. She said, well, it doesn't exist, we'd have to make it. So we did. But it's that one little odd thing that makes your eye rotate around a static composition.
So he went into the garage.
Yeah.
In Light Sleeper, it was also a lamp. It was a lamp in Willem Dafoe's room. He's going to get up here, Ethan, as Reverend Toller, and you can see how tricky it is when you don't tilt or pan. So I can't tilt or pan. So that means I may lose him here, you know. I've lost her. Now, normally, you would start on the two of them and do a slight move or pan. So you would see her, and then you would see him, and then he would bring you back to her again. But since I won't tilt or pan, I can't have her in the shot and hold the envelope. And it also means that he has to hug this wall here on the right, otherwise he'll step out of frame because I'm not going to pan over if he goes out of frame.
Open it.
And, you know, when you make these rules for yourself, it really forces you into some odd and interesting compositions. You know, creativity, for the most part, is defined by restrictions. And you know, at first you think the restrictive things you're doing are inhibiting your creativeness, but it's sort of the opposite. That once the creative mind realizes how cornered it is, it gets more inventive in how finding a means of escape.
She was becoming someone I didn't know. Like, before I was pregnant, even. He was just so full of anger, Yeah, I should probably call my parents.
My sister. They should know.
I stayed while she called her sister.
All these shots I like held forever.
Going to drive down.
The first cut of the film was about 20 minutes longer, and it was just endless shots of people walking up and down corridors, empty frames, nobody moving, somebody exiting the frame and me holding for 10 seconds. Because I just didn't know how I would calibrate the stillness and when I would want to be still for a long time. And Don, that's my assistant there pushing the wheelchair. I met him in Santiago, Chile. He was working at a film festival. Now, here's something I had to do as a little bit of a cheat, which is this is blown up, and I think it really worked out nicely, because I wanted to end that scene on an empty frame, and I didn't have an empty frame. I hadn't shot it that way, and so we blew that shot up so that they would both exit, and I could have an empty frame.
I'm going to tear these pages out.
So he has gotten this letter from Michael, the boy who shot himself. And he also has Michael's computer, because that bear on the slab of ice was, from Michael's wall. And so now he is researching what he has been... what is read in this letter. This is a wonderful Braconian kind of scene. And I really debated whether to hold this shot until he completely exited. And I finally decided not to. I start when he's not there yet. But one of the things is a reference to a shot in Pickpocket, where you're doubling information. So in Pickpocket, you see him write,
They talk about prayer.
I went to a large bank and sat down. And then you see the actual words, I went to a large bank and sat down. Then the character goes to a large bank and sits down. So I do the same thing here, where he says, I laid down in the church in a pew, and then you see him doing it. Well, that repetition, that doubling of information, it also is another kind of withholding device. It slows you down.
I wake up feeling better. My relationships.
Of course, this here is the room with no doors. Essentially, they're all sort of shot against the same backgrounds, so that if you try to find the door in this room, you'll never find it. I forget this actor's name, but he was so on the nose at what those kids are like, and having been in my share of youth groups in the church, I know how serious they are and how superficially they are portrayed. And maybe this is as good as time as any to talk about some faith-based movies. There's a lot of faith-based movies, and a number of them are very, very successful. I don't consider faith-based movies as uniquely spiritual. I think they're just like every other kind of movie. They use all the conventional techniques of action and empathy and identification. And essentially what they do is you know, put Jesus into a secular movie. So they use all these normal movie techniques. But using that kind of logic, you know, filmmakers use the same techniques to make a film about how great Hitler is, or a film of how bad Hitler is. It's the same techniques, whether you're Leni Riefenstahl or whether you're somebody on the other side. And so that the style is still the same manipulation. And I don't find that that is a spiritual style. I find that it's just another level of manipulation. You know, it's just another level of everybody in the football stadium standing up and shouting the same thing at the same time. And it leaves no room for the individual to move on his or her own. And which is why you have to withhold, because you cannot have fast contemplation any more than you can have fast meditation. You have to slow things down. Good things happen when you slow down. And we as film viewers have been so conditioned to have the filmmaker do everything for us and keep that speed roller going that, you know, we almost forget how to slow down. But on the other hand, because our multimedia minds are multitasking at such a rate, it's easier now to make a slower film because you don't have to be that much slower because audiences are so acclimated to seeing a fast pace that you just slow down a little and you start to get into an interesting zone. And you know, as I said a moment ago, you can't make a spiritual film in an empathetic, action-driven way. I just don't think it is possible. And so that's my sort of feeling about faith-based films. It's just, you know, you're doing God's work with the devil's tools.
Wrote a letter. He had some requests.
Now, here we are at Arthur Kills on Staten Island. We call it Handstown Kills. This is it's not really a toxic waste dump, but it is a scrapyard for old ships, and there's a lot of toxic substances in there. And so you are not supposed to actually put your foot into that muck, you know, they have signs. So now we have this very, very peculiar final ceremony of disposing of Michael's ashes. And I wanted a song here, and I wanted an ecological song. And Neil Young had written a song for some green celebration. And I thought, you know, that would be really kind of perverse to have the church youth choir singing about end fracking now at a funeral service. And so Jonathan Demme was alive at that time, and Jonathan was friends with Neil, and so I was able to get over to Neil Young, and his representative said, well, how much do you think, how much were you thinking of paying him for this song? And I said, well, I was thinking of pro bono. And he said, Neil gets $50,000 for a song. And I said, yes, I understand that. But if he's going to write a song about saving the environment, why did he write that song? He didn't write it for money. He wrote it to get that message out. And now I'm giving him a chance to get what he really wanted. And so he said, okay, I'll talk to Neil. And we settled on $500. So thank you, Neil Young.
Let's save the water and build a life for our sons.
Now, this Arthur Kills, as I said before, is on Staten Island. So it's, again, you know, within that 30-mile zone where you can still... The whole idea of the 30-mile zone, the TMZ, is if you work 30 miles from the center of a town, the day begins for your employees when they arrive at work. When you're outside the 30-mile zone, the day begins when they leave home. So that's approximately 2 hours of work a day you are deprived of if you're outside the zone. This entire pancake house is digitized. This is very identifiably Queens, and this place does not exist except in the digital imagination of the arts team. Here again is a situation where you take everything out. You know, I mean, when was the last time you were in a monochromatic coffee shop that had no signs or advertisements or anything?
Just bring me a coffee.
And again, because I'm not tilting or panning, of course, you know, I can't pan over to show Ethan. I just have to wait until I can cut.
I stopped by the printer.
Michael Gaston here plays this character, Balk, who is a supporter of the church and also a supporter of anti-environmental groups, which is not that unusual, since essentially that is what the Koch brothers do.
Is the organ repaired?
Cedric in this film uses the name, his real name, Cedric Kyles, and we just didn't feel it was right for the audience to bill him in as Cedric the Entertainer. I particularly like this shot here, where right in the middle of a serious conversation, he falls into a kind of self-absorption about the preachers who have gone before him and the lives they had led and whether God had helped them. And it lends a kind of spooky feeling to a scene which, for the most part, is expositional.
I ask only because.
And then I was also able to
both First Reform
have this exchange I liked, which is
protest song.
this notion of the religious counselor, you know. And he says, you counseled him, yes. You counseled him, and then he killed himself, you know. To which the answer is yes. That's exactly what I did. And that goes into another little arc with this character. This is a man whose son died in the war because he was foolish enough to encourage him to enlist. And his wife left him, and he regrets that every day of his life. And then another boy comes into his life and needs help, and he counsels him, and that boy kills himself. And I'll return back to this at the very end when there's a third chance, you know.
Consensus, 97%. The man who says nothing always seems more intelligent.
Now here, Reverend Toller brings up the notion of stewardship again. And this is, you know, will come up again toward the end. This kind of contradictory notion of
yeah, but this isn't politics.
You know the mind of God?
Are Christians are supposed to
Do his plans for Earth?
exploit the environment or sustain it, and you know, whichever side you're on, you can find justification in the Bible. And in fact, you can find justification in the Bible for most anything.
How?
I'm going to bounce from this scene into a very unexpected scene. And Ethan always thought it was absolutely bizarre kind of thing. And but it began as a reference to Country Priest.
You counsel them, Reverend.
The self-absorbed, self-mortifying country priest in Bresson's film has one moment of joy, and that's when he is walking into town and one of his parishioners stops on his motorcycle and asks him if he wants a ride. And he gets on the back of the motorcycle and they drive into town, and you can see him smiling. You know, the simple exhilaration of physical movement that he is so deprived of. And so because of that scene, I thought, you know, I would like to have him do a bike ride. And you can see him actually, you know, enjoying himself. You know, that smile right there. And as juxtaposition to all of the other self-examination he's doing. And this is just sort of a wonderful shot about the tentacles of the brain here. But, of course, Amanda, that's not Amanda there. But Amanda being pregnant, we didn't want to take a chance with her on the bicycle. So a double did the long shots. And then we created a rig for her so she could do the close-up.
So much.
I enjoyed it. It's been a long time.
I'm going to do shortly, you know, the thing I said I wouldn't do. And I remember we're doing this scene, and I said to the cinematographer, I said to Alex, you know, you have some rail in the car, in the truck. He said, yeah. I said, let's lay some rail. He said, but we don't lay rail in this movie. I said, I don't know why. Today, I'm looking at this scene. It feels like I should lay some rail. I think I'm just going to do a shot like I've never done and won't do again. But so that's the shot right here. Well, now I am panning.
The rent's paid for.
And after the pan, the camera starts dollying backwards. You know, it's a very conventional shot. Pans with them, lets them in.
Are we talking pink or blue?
Blue.
Exactly the opposite of everything else. And why did I decide that day it was time to break the rule? I don't know. I hadn't planned to break the rule when I was there. And then I saw it. I said, oh, no, let's break it today.
You really would have harmed someone?
Here's another case where one of the techniques you use is heightened sound effects. You know, the clock is too loud. The sound of the feet on those old wooden boards is too loud, you know. And it creates a kind of unease that fits in with the uncomfortable zone you're creating for your viewer. And hopefully an uncomfortable zone that he or she will respond to by taking a leap with you to another kind of reality.
I asked him to come. I was raised in the church, and I never could quite let it go. I'd be in
this is a very strong backlight. I think it's very, very beautiful, but it makes it a little hard to see your face.
Yeah, I'm gonna go get some boxes. I'll come back for the clothes.
I have to cut here because I won't pan or dolly them over. And I can put them now in this silhouette. And then she comes up with the big question, you know, will you pray with me? Now, he's been saying all along, you know, I wish I could pray, if only I could pray. And so now he prays, and he says, you know, I opened my mouth and the words came out, whatever that means. Whether that means successful or not.
I spoke, and the words came out of my mouth. By thy words you shall be justified, and by thy words you shall be condemned.
The next scene is, in fact, the fulcrum on which the movie pivots. he's bringing back Michael's stuff, his research. He's looking at Michael's eco literature, and he's starting to get interested in this world. And what happens here over this shot is the very first time you hear music. Only what they call non-diegetic movement of music, which means music that's not coming from the screen, like people singing. But it's not really music. It is soundscaping. A man named Brian Williams, who works under the name Lusmord, does this type of soundscaping. And he is called the composer of the film, primarily because, sound technicians don't get royalties. So for him to get royalties, he has to be the composer. But we've now entered into an area of film composing where sound design and music are essentially the same product. And you are using sounds to create music. The techniques that started like with Walter Murch using helicopters as a beat in Apocalypse Now, you're using sound more and more as music, and music is becoming more and more like sound. And so I don't know whether there is music in this film.
No, I have not lost my faith.
Somebody asked me at a screening of the film, I said, I want to ask you the question that Michael asked in the film. He said, will God forgive us? And I said, he has to. That's why we made him. That's his job. Of course he's going to forgive us. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe that's a little indiscreet way to put it. But again, here, let's wait till he exits. Okay. This is up around Harlem in New York, St. Barnabas. And again, the exterior of that hospital was filled with signage and colors, and we had to go in digitally and remove it all so it looks spare. Here's one of there's a couple examples of red in here. There's this one, and then there's the bloody head, and there's another one coming up.
Pull down my barns and build greater.
There's a very nice little performance of Ethan here, conveying someone who is seriously ill, but thinks he's hiding it.
Neither for the body what ye shall put on. The life is more than meat.
He has just such a great look for this film.
Is more than raiment.
It's the Montgomery Clift look from I Confess.
When did he come back?
Or the Country Priest look, or the Leo Moran Belmondo look. He's certain kind, a certain kind of male physique and face. It lends itself to a suffering soul. And if you have that, it makes the storyteller's job so much easier. Whereas if you have the face and physique of Brendan Gleeson, as in the film Calvary, it's much harder to pull that off because he doesn't look like, the image of the suffering priest.
Do a gastroscopic exam. We lower a fiber optic camera down the throat and esophagus and take a look around. It's an outpatient procedure, local anesthetic. You should be able to.
This is a scene where I did shoot coverage here. I shot 2 singles here. And, but again, just letting it play. See, because when you don't editorialize, the viewer has to start making choices. In this case, there's a person on one side of the screen and a person on another. An edit would tell you immediately which person is more important at a particular moment. Well, it's more important to hear Ethan talking or Ethan listening. What's more important here, what this guy is saying or what Ethan is reacting to? You really can't completely watch both at the same time. You're going to shift. And to do that, it makes the viewer more of an agent in the experience and takes away some of the passivity that editing provides by, not letting you choose what you want to see. Of course, there are a lot of editing choices I make in this film, but from time to time, by not making them, you remind the viewer, this. You should decide what's important here. This is what they were doing so much in that Romanian cinema that started with 4 months, 3 weeks, 2 days, sticking characters on either side of the frame and letting you decide which is the more important.
From our determination to have our own way.
The upcoming scene, again, harkens back to Winter Light. And people have asked me why he is so cruel to her in this scene. Well, there's a couple answers. One is, with this kind of cloying woman, subtlety is not very effective. And you really just have to tell them because they won't take no for no. Or they won't take maybe for no. And but then the other reason is something is happening to him now. And he is starting to break away. And I talked earlier about when the character starts to veer, when he starts to become someone you don't know anymore. And he's starting to take a path. And one of the things that he has to get out of his life to take this path is these two women. And first with this one and then with the other one. And now he's starting to become that person that you didn't think he was. That person who maybe doesn't deserve your identification. But he's too interesting for you now to give up on him because you really believe that something is it's going to be worth the journey. You've been on the journey long enough to know that it's going to be worth it, even if this character starts to become somebody I might not have identified with, at the beginning. After he steps out of the frame here, I do something to intensify what I'm up to, which is I hold a little longer than I normally do after someone exits. So this just sits here on this empty composition. And then slowly start bringing up the soundscape, this kind of horror music sound underneath. And then you have this empty frame. He enters, he exits, he re-enters. And then you realize that light in the closet is showing the flag from his fallen son, which is the only visual reference to that son in the film. And normally films, they'll have a lot of snapshots and photographs. Now here's the monster. It was a monster movie, and now he's going to take the monster out of the closet. And he is being pulled now. the clock returns. This footage coming up is real footage from YouTube. It's of a suicide bomber in Istanbul, and from a surveillance camera. And, you know, that's how quickly a person vanishes. And you're there, and then they're gone. And he realizes how quickly he can vanish. And then another reference comes up here to Taxi Driver. Marty had a shot where he looked into a glass of Alka-Seltzer. And I reversed it to zooming into Pepto-Bismol in whiskey, which is a very nasty drink. When I was writing Taxi Driver, I had an ulcer, and I needed to drink to write, but every time I drank, I was going to pain. So I started drinking Malox mixed with whiskey, and it worked to a degree, but I cannot recommend it.
And the time for the dead to be judged.
There are two bits of narration that I changed in post. This one and the one coming up from Ephesians. This one is from Revelations. And they are both more jihadist than the original script. The original script narrations were relatively neutral. After I screened the film, I realized that I had to dial up the extremeness of his feelings. And so I chose this text here from Revelations about destroying the destroyers of this earth. And you know, if you have spent any time around church people, you know that once they start quoting from Revelations, they've gone to the dark side.
It's hard to struggle against torpor.
Earlier, he had promised that he would never rip anything out of his book, but now he has. You know, this is not entirely reliable. This is a very unlikely room. It is it's in the old Dutch Reformed Church in Brooklyn, is where we shot the parsonage. The parsonage was not the same location as the Episcopalian Church in Bethpage. And of course, there is a discrepancy of architectural elements too. Like, you know, so he exits frame, he comes back in. You know, there is no coverage. I didn't shoot him at the door. I didn't shoot two of them talking. I just locked myself into this, so you're gonna have to wait till they come back in.
No. I'm really frightened.
Why did I do this scene? I knew at the end of the story that I was going to have to take flight in some way. And I wanted to indicate to the viewer that I knew there was another world. And that we are going to go there. And so I thought, you know, how can I convey that? How can I convey that? And I thought quite literally to myself, you know, what would Tarkovsky do? And I realized that Tarkovsky would have them levitate. That was Tarkovsky's go-to position. You get a man, a woman in a horizontal posture, they levitate. He did it in The Mirror, he did it in Sacrifice. I thought, well, you know, that'd be cool. You know, they should just levitate. But then, instead of levitating for a blissful or euphoric reason. I take the levitation, and it begins identically like the first panel of Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. And then it moves into the central panel, which is the present, and then it moves into the last panel, which is the underworld, hell. And because of Reverend Toller's mental disposition, he's going to take this Edenic moment and he is going to turn it into hell. And it gives you sort of an idea of the spot he's getting into.
I guess
Now, somebody pointed out to me that you shouldn't lie on the stomach of a woman who's pregnant, and I can guarantee you that that this woman right here is not Amanda. That's Amanda. But when and then we had a little rig built for her so she would not have pressure on her stomach. I love just holding this shot, this profile, over and over again, which is, of course, the composition from Thomas Crown Affair with Faye Dunaway and Steve McQueen, backlit by the fireplace. And I said to the cinematographer, let's do Thomas Crown Affair. And he knew exactly what I said. Okay, oh yeah, let's do that shot. And so we just do it. Now, we have to obscure her hair here, because when we come up to this shot, this is no longer Amanda. And this is the double, and this is shot on a green screen stage. Well, their bodies are shot on a green screen stage. Way at the end of the shoot, long after Amanda had left, and then it has to be sunk in with the plate of the room. So now we're in Tarkovsky land, and they're off they go, and I decided to take them on this journey. And this journey through the beauties of this world. Now, all of this footage was bought off the internet because of the omnipresence of drones everywhere. There are these drone sites, and you just go into them, and you can find drone footage, and it's relatively inexpensive. And so this is all bought drone footage. We didn't shoot any of this ourselves. Here's where, in that Koyaanisqatsi sort of way, he sees, and all he can see is the contamination of humanity on this planet and what it has done. And so we go off from them and then just into these nightmarish tableaus. Reference the Amazon, which was referenced earlier, and the next shot is from Cambodia, I think. Yeah, this is canal of junk, not sewage, just garbage. And the burning trash heaps, which became the inspiration for the one sheet with a line of fire. Now, this is the actual Arthur Kills. We didn't shoot this. Someone on the internet shot this, and we just bought it. But it's the location we used. And we just dropped Michael in there. You can see him. He's standing in that top window.
Go, 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 come on, come on, come on. Come on.
This is a scene that Ethan liked a lot because he liked the relationship of the Underground Railroad when men of the church became fanatical, a la John Brown, in the fight against slavery, and that it was necessary to take up arms against slavery. And he saw that as a sync point with what's happening to this character. That was not my initial motivation in writing the scene. I was looking for a palate cleanser. That the movie had gotten so heavy and so tense, particularly after that levitation. I just wanted to relax a little bit. And I thought, well, you know, what better way to relax and to bring in some kids, you know, bring in some school kids and tell a little story, and everyone will just, the viewer will just chill for a second, because as soon as this is over, we're going to go for the end. And so this was, to me, a kind of relaxing moment. And of course, you know, that's a false trap that, you know, was obviously shot somewhere else.
Hear the sound of the slave hunters' horses outside, on their knees, holding each other's hands, praying for God.
But that light fixture, that's Episcopalian. Now, this scene, again, empty frame. Who's going to enter first? No, she's going to enter first. This scene is part of my family mythology. This was always a story that I had been told about my grandfather, who was a salary farmer in Muskegon, Michigan, about how he had gone to the bank and gotten in the elevator with his boys and had a heart attack and died, and said to his boys, you know, take off my shoes, I'm standing on holy ground, which is a quote from Moses in the desert. And I don't know whether that story is true or not. You know, every family has its own mythology and things that get repeated down the generations, so it probably isn't true, but it certainly was part of my mythology. And I thought this was a great time to use that speech, because he takes suicide and connects it to being on holy ground. Well, you know, this is getting to be very spooky now, because if he thinks a kid who blew his head off is standing on holy ground, then what kind of ground is he standing on?
So I'll see you in Buffalo?
I think I'm gonna go to the...
Now he has to do that other thing, just like he had to get Esther off the playing field. He has to get Mary off the playing field, because he's planning on doing something that he doesn't want them to influence. And so he has to make sure that she's out of town and will not come back, and says in this cold way, have a good evening. There's a little tiny camera move there, too, one of the few, in this delightful Dutch composition. Now, the narration that comes up, that's my Bible again. The narration that comes up here is one of those really militant narrations. It's from First Ephesians. And St. Paul is talking about taking up arms against the forces of this world. And what he's really writing about to Ephesians is he's writing about the Romans. He's writing about the persecution of the Christians by the Romans, and that you have to resist, the Romans. But of course, this quote has been used, over the centuries for any number of crackpots to justify violence in the name of the Lord. And there he's repeating his military stance. And now all of a sudden we've kind of segued. Even though the camera isn't moving, it is moving because it's in a car. And we're in this little wandering period, which, harkens back a bit to Taxi Driver. And again here, the normal thing to do would have been to show them, cut to him, but just let this scene play out, and then she calls him, and then he enters.
This unit makes recyclable plastic markers. Bulk has facilities.
The long overcoat here, of course, is also kind of tribute to Country Priest, those long cloaks that he had in that film. And again now, this kind of offset narration, right in the middle of all this heaviness, he starts talking about how good the fish is, and why do we deny ourselves the good things. But of course, he's now a stalker. And then we're right into that kind of Times Square sort of thing, and coming up is a shot with the first AD and the second AD fighting. The first AD is the woman, the second AD is the man. And they're doing a pretty good job of mixing it up there. And that, again, harkens back to a kind of shot in Taxi Driver where there's people on the street fighting. Now we're going back to Arthur Kills and doing the shot where he enters frame, exits frame, re-enters frame. And so since we were shooting at dusk for dawn, this shot in the purple actually occurred after the shot that precedes it in the pink, because, as it got darker, we just didn't move the camera. You just keep shooting it over and over again. We shot it, maybe over the course of 20 minutes or 25 minutes. Magic Hour is about 25 minutes long. We shot it maybe 8-9 times. So this goes back. And of course, the line here is, for me, my favorite in the film, which is, "I have found a new form of prayer." But also before that, he says that very important thing about that preservation is, in fact, a form of creation. That's how man participates in creation, is to preserve creation. And there's a quote for how the Abundant Life Church got its name. This band above Cedric's head is the original founder of the AME Church. This scene, very different feel, It's not come over here and sit, let me sit with you, come over here and sit by me. And basically he's being called into the principal's office to be criticized.
Some stomach issues.
And I understand.
It is a very kind of rich scene because, even though your sympathies lie with Ethan. Cedric has the better argument. Cedric is the one who's making more sense.
I understand, all right? I'll start taking better care of myself.
You're always in the garden.
This notion of always being in the garden, it is a real temptation for Christians who are less than fully balanced. The temptation to use the history of blood in the Bible, in the sacrifices of the Old Testament and the sacrifice of Jesus, and to say that my blood, my suffering is necessary, and that God wants my blood and suffering. This is not what the Bible teaches, but you can see how many young men and women get there, and how that when Christians go off the rails, they often go off the rails in this kind of blood-driven way. You know, it's part of the bloody DNA of Christianity.
The creation waits in eager expectation of liberation from bondage. That's Romans 8:20.
Cedric comes back with the St. Paul thing about the earth will be resurrected, and then this really sort of crushing notion that, you know, maybe it is God's plan for the earth to be destroyed. You know, maybe we don't know as much as he does. And that is a hard argument to refute because, as Ethan says earlier in the film, you know, who can know the mind of God?
Who is that priest that you like so much?
Thomas Merton.
Thomas Merton. He didn't live in the real world either.
Yes, he did.
No, he was a monk who lived in a monastery in Kentucky and wrote books.
Well, somebody has to do something. It's the earth that hangs in the balance.
Well, what if this is his plan? What if we...
Here's where Ethan breaks the rule. You know, it wasn't written this way. And he breaks down now. He starts to cry. And that's not in the script. And so we shot it. And the first take, he did like this. And he came back to me and said, look, I know I'm not supposed to do that. But it just felt right. Now, I'll go back and do it with a poker face next time. And I said, no, I think your instinct was right. I think that, you know, that intuitive thing that you felt, that this was the moment to break the rule. This was the moment to show emotion. You were right. You broke it at just the right time.
I want to be there. I have to be there. It's my church. It's 250 years. I want to be there. I want to introduce.
So we didn't even shoot a non-emotional version. I just realized right at that moment that this was the right choice.
Will that be a problem?
Not at all. Not at all.
Well, good. Good. Listen, we'll get through this reconsecration.
One of my regrets, I have very few regrets. We shot a couple scenes that were taken out, and they were wild to be taken out. There's one where he gets pulled over by a police officer that just sort of didn't have any real function. One of my budgetary regrets is, of course, that we really could not afford the number of extras that this, you know, final scene demanded. You know, extras are expensive, and you know, you count every one. And you know, shooting in New York, there are no inexpensive extras. He's now put another patch on his vest, and that is the patch that represents his son. He writes Magical Mystery Tour, and then he crosses that out. He writes For the Preservation of the Planet, and he crosses that out. And then he writes, I wish I could have chosen another form of death, and crosses that out, and then closes the book. This is him writing right now. And in the editing process, I realized that if the viewer is involved now, we don't have to tell them what he's writing anymore. You know, it's just like at a certain point in Taxi Driver, you stop seeing the journal, you know, because you're writing the journal now too. So I cut out the explicit things he was writing in there. Now we're going to see the arrival of the third son. And his first son died, and then Michael died, and now young Michael, inside his mother, arrives. And he had planned to walk into this church and purify it with his new form of prayer. But now he can't, because he can't kill one more kid, one more son. And now, what to do? Reverend Toller has, now invested himself. So here's the governor, he finally shows up. Reverend Toller has invested himself. How else can this story end? Because he knows it has to end. And for the answer to that, I use yet another reference, only this one isn't to a movie, it's to a book. Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor. And in that book, Hazel Motes, who's another one of these Christian kids who goes crazy, puts out his eyes with lye and wraps himself up in barbed wire. And so I thought I would take that from O'Connor and have him do the barbed wire. And which is very much in keeping with a certain kind of Christian flagellation, the ascetics who whip themselves and cut themselves in order to be closer to the pain of our Lord. She's going to start a song now, The Everlasting Arms. And some people have thought it was a reference to Night of the Hunter, where Lillian Gish sings this. And maybe it is, but my first association with it is from the Billy Graham Crusades, and George Beverly Shea, who would always sing this. and how much I liked it as a kid, him singing Everlasting Arms. And so this is my little Flannery O'Connor moment. We stretch out this song over and over again. Again, playing a metric composition, everything's center punched.
Arms, what a blessedness, what a
right into the camera.
peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms, leaning, safe and secure from...
Probably a little more blood than we should have had, but it works all the same. The next cut back to parsonage, this great lyric about a walk on the pilgrim path, and we start adding a kind of drum beat underneath here, a bass beat, and we set up, not only set up the bass, but we'd also set up the Drano earlier on, and so the solution now is this new form of communion, which is death by Drano.
Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms.
When you go to the wide shot here, and he drops the glass and looks. Now this next shot of her is much brighter. The room sort of glows. It wasn't this bright before. And how did she get there? The door was locked. He drops the glass, and all of a sudden, now we're on the move. A dolly-to-dolly cut, and around and around and around and around. Now, this is the ending of Ordette, when the husband, his wife comes back to life, is risen from the dead, and all he cares about is having her carnal presence. No, not that he's seen a miracle, but he has the person he loves back. Is Reverend Toller alive or dead at this point? I don't know. You can make a case for both. Maybe love has saved the day. Or maybe this is an ecstatic vision of a man who is on all fours dying while he pukes out his stomach, which is not necessarily a sad ending either. So it's a choice of two happy endings.